So I read a lot of books in February. Somehow it was the shortest month, and I'm trying to think of a reason as to why I read so many this month, but got nothing. Lots of romance. So good, so romantic. But keep watching for 20 minutes of chaotic reviews and inevitable Taylor Swift references. Rhett Eaton, Mirrorball, literally. Are you ready for it? Let's talk about the 17 books that I read in February. This month I feel like I read a lot of these like colorful fun books, but I also read a few like what I like to call reality TV show style fantasy books, where you're not really reading for like the world building, but you're more reading for like the romance and for the drama. And a lot of these are adult books, so you know, check the content warnings, check the age ratings, all of those things. Let's start off with the standalones. So Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. This was the first book that I read in February. I gave it 3.5 stars. Let me tell you why. It wasn't really a bad book per se, but I loved The Love Hypothesis and Bride so much better than Love on the Brain because both of those were 5 stars, while this one was only 3.5. Honestly, this one just felt like a not so great copy of The Love Hypothesis. Like the main guy, Levi, he had the exact same personality as Adam in The Love Hypothesis, and B like had the same personality as what's her name, Olive in The Love Hypothesis. So you know, it's not like super original. B is a woman in STEM, something she always is talking about, and she's always like, what would Marie Curie do? Which is funny the first 10 times, but the next 100 times she mentions Marie Curie, I'm like, okay, let's download a new joke. But B jumps at the opportunity to take a job for NASA, but the job requires her to co-lead this, I don't know anything about like space and engineering, but she has to co-lead some sort of program with her arch nemesis from grad school, Levi, and he hates her. At least she thinks he hates her, but of course, since it's a romance book, he doesn't hate her. Also, she wears galaxy leggings, which is extremely questionable fashion-wise. B was very Jessica Day from New Girl, which is fun, and honestly that didn't bother me, but I know that bothered a lot of people about this book. Like, very outgoing, kind of quirky. And my main issue with this was there was just so much miscommunication, and for someone who has a PhD and is as smart as B is, like, she shouldn't be having this much miscommunication. And I feel like their chemistry is more told that they have chemistry rather than being actually shown that they have chemistry on page. Then we have the first 2 books in the Chestnut Spring series by Elsie Silver. The first one, Flawless, I gave 4 stars, and Heartless I gave 5 stars. This series is a series with interconnected standalones, and it's like small town cowboy ranch romance, which is always fun. So the first one, Rhett Eaton, he's a bull rider, which I know nothing about that. And he's kind of having some bad publicity, so his agent is like, you need to get it together. So his agent sends his daughter, Summer, to basically babysit Rhett into getting his act together for the press. And Summer is like very serious and very like girl boss, and Rhett is like the kind of rowdy type golden boy. He is very Mirrorball, and literally, because after reading this book, you know, in Mirrorball the lyrics, it's like, and they sent home the horses and the rodeo clowns. Literally did not know rodeo clowns were like an actual job. I thought that was like figurative language by like saying people who I guess like were clowns, you know, like you're clowning and at the rodeo. Like, I thought it was figurative language. I didn't realize that was an actual job that was a part of bull riding. So Rhett Eaton, Mirrorball, literally. And Summer Hamilton is the main woman. She was so would've, could've, should've. But the reason why I didn't give this book 5 stars and only 4 stars was there just wasn't enough chemistry. Again, like, I feel like I am really sensitive to chemistry in books, and if the main characters don't have enough chemistry, then I'm like probably gonna downvote it. But overall, I can't wait to read the rest of the series, and for some reason I literally read the first 2 of these books back to back, and then I like didn't read the rest of them this month, so in March we're gonna try to read the rest of them. And then Heartless, the main guy in this book, Cade, he is the brother, the older brother of Rhett, and Cade is like grumpy, very grumpy. He's a single dad, and he hires Summer in this book. He hires her best friend to become his son's nanny, and her name is Willa, and they kind of butt heads a little bit at first, but they slowly warm up to each other and romance. I really love this one. I thought both of the characters were so good. This was Grumpy Sunshine done correctly, where the guy is not just like full-on rude. He's just kind of more negative and not as optimistic. But yeah, I can't wait to read the next one in this series. Then we have The Spy and I. Berkeley Romance actually sent me a copy of this, so thank you so much to them. And I had heard nothing about this book prior to receiving it in the mail. And like, I read the back of it and I was like, wow, that sounds good. So I just like picked it up at like 1 a.m. and I just flew through it. So this, I think it's like marketed as a romance, and like, yeah, there are themes of romance in it. It doesn't feel like a typical romance book in the way that like this book does. So the main character, Dove, she is some sort of like cyber security analyst, and she has a sister who is apparently a photographer. But then one day when she decides to meet her sister for dinner, her sister doesn't show up, and then Dove's just like at the restaurant, and then some people try to like Dove, and she's like, wait, what's going on? And this guy Mendez, he saves her from the restaurant and is like, oh, your sister is actually an undercover CIA agent and you need to come with us. We're the CIA and we need your help with this mission. She's like, well, where's my sister? And he's like, your sister's gone to ground, but like, I'm her partner. But then Dove's like, are you really her partner? Are you telling me the truth? Then they go to the Czech Republic and they participate in this like wild government mission operation. It feels like a romantic comedy mixed with a thriller, which is wonderful. It doesn't have that great reviews on Goodreads, which is so shocking to me. I think it's kind of insta-lovey, the part of the book that is actually romance, but it's fine. The love is not the main part of the book, but I think the way that it's marketed is as a romance, so then people are expecting this super like steamy romance, but like they literally just kiss and that's it. But overall, I give some 5 stars. Next up, we have Night for Day. I actually read an arc of this, which was so much fun. This is like a magical realism book, so it's like fiction, but there's also a lot of elements of fantasy. This was like unlike any book that I've ever read before. It was so like poetic and ethereally written. Does that make sense? It felt very like otherworldly and aesthetic. In this book, Ward and Camille, they dated each other in college and then they broke up and went their separate ways and never thought they'd see each other again. So second chance romance incoming. And years later, they end up running into each other in a bookshop in London and they find out they're both interviewing for separate jobs. Ward is interviewing for a job at a jewelry shop and Camille is interviewing for a job at like an antique store. So yeah, they both get the jobs, and then after their first shift is over at their respective jobs, they get locked into their storefronts like an escape room, and they quickly find out that they are pawns in this great war of all of the gods in the world, and the gods, to settle their civil war, they're using Camille and Ward. So that's such an interesting premise, and I love just the poetic vibes of it, and it takes place in London, and I always love London books, so the reason why I didn't give this book 5 stars is because the world building was just not there. There was a little bit of an explanation, but also I was like a little bit confused. Sometimes characters were just like introduced and magic things were just introduced and I'm like, where did this come from? Like it just popped out of nowhere and I was like, need a little more context here. And also one of the characters was kind of irritating. But as I'm filming this video, I'm realizing the books that get knocked down from 5 stars to 4 stars are because of A, lack of chemistry between the characters, and B, lack of world building. Next up is The Friendship Study. This was such a good 5-star book. This one was probably my favorite of the month, or The Spy and I, not really quite sure yet. I didn't really even give that many books 5 stars this month. Normally I give a lot more books 5 stars. But this book was so romantic and so emotional. The main character, Jesse, he used to be a firefighter, but he was in a car accident, so he can no longer be a firefighter, and he's kind of like having a quarter-life crisis, and one of his only family members left, and the person who raised him, his grandfather, has Alzheimer's, so Jesse is like really having an emotional time in his life. But Jesse's friend George works at the psychology department at the local university, and he's like, Jesse, look, I have got this paid psychology study that I want you to join. It's about making friends and friendship. And Jesse's like, sure, yeah, whatever, money. I need it. So he decides to join. And at the same time, George is also telling his co-worker Lulu, who works in the history department at the university, to join this paid psychological study. And Lulu's just come off of a breakup and she's kind of having trouble fitting in at her job. So Jesse and Lulu, they arrive at the psychological study and they see each other and they're like, oh my gosh, we went on a blind date earlier. And Jesse ghosted Lulu. But they slowly start to connect again over the period of the study. And guess what? In the study, you can't have romantic relationships, so there's a little bit of forbidden romance going on. But this was just so emotional. Like, Lulu really brought Jesse back to life and she helped him get on the right path again. And just everything was perfect about it. It's the spice, everything so good, so romantic. And there was a scene where I literally started crying, and I was trying like not to cry on the airplane. Like I read this much of it on the airplane, and I read like this much when I got home off of the airplane, and then like as soon as I got home, tears. Next up is Next of Kin by Hannah Bonham Young. So the main character Chloe, she learns that her birth mother has just had another baby, and Chloe is like, I've got to become the new baby's guardian. So she like applies to be the guardian, and she doesn't qualify for like the financial background. But CPS in this book, they've created this new initiative where 2 guardians can join their households together like via a roommate situation, so then they can qualify to become guardians. So Chloe gets paired with Warren, who's a mechanic. She gets paired with him and his younger brother, who is deaf. And Chloe and Warren do not get along at first. She is like way too optimistic, and Warren is like really grumpy and kind of just like mad at the world. But as their roommates, they slowly start getting along and building a relationship while caring for their respective siblings. So it's super emotional. I loved Chloe's character and how adaptable she was. Again, the reason why I knocked it down from 5 to 4 stars was because Chloe and Warren's relationship was like not as chemistry as I wanted it to be. I just think the pacing of their relationship didn't make any sense. It was just missing that je ne sais quoi about it. Like they jumped so quickly from enemies to lovers. Like they were screaming at each other earlier, and then all of a sudden they're saying like I love you. Like it just didn't make any sense, and it was like a little choppy. So I wish their relationship would have been a little bit more developed. But the next one of these comes out soonish, so I'm really excited to read that one. Then we have Ready or Not by Cara Bastone. First of all, look at this cover. It's so pretty. But this is an accidental pregnancy romance book, and I know this is an unpopular opinion, but I really do like the accidental pregnancy trope when it's written well. Keyword like when the main character doesn't randomly like get pregnant in the book. Like I love it when it's like emotional like this one. But this basically follows Eve's pregnancy journey with her best friend and her best friend's brother Chef and the baby's father, and it gets super messy with the baby's father because he goes back and forth from like wanting to help her and then he like ghosts her. It's a very complex situation, and I felt like very realistic somehow. And Eve's friendship with her best friend Willa is starting to change because Eve is pregnant, and she has to navigate that too, while also feeling more of a developing relationship with Willa's brother Shep. It was just the perfect slow burn romance book. Even though this book, like, it didn't really feel like your typical romance book, it more felt like a contemporary fiction book with an undertone of romance. But I gave this one 4.5 stars. And then, yes, I do read literary fiction books. I read Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This one is about an octopus. It's a magical realism book. So the main character, Tova, she is a 70-year-old woman, and her husband has died. Her son went missing 30 years ago, so she's somewhat lonely, and to pass the time she takes a part-time job as a cleaning person at the local aquarium. And at the aquarium she befriends a giant Pacific octopus named Marcellus, and he is one of the other point of views in the book, the octopus, which is really interesting. And he doesn't like talk with words to Tova. He kind of communicates through like gestures and doing different activities, and like Tova kind of reads his mind, so it's like not super unrealistic. But he, the octopus, he figures out what happened to Tova's missing son, and he's trying to figure out how to communicate what he knows with Tova. And there's a bunch of other point of views in the story because there are a bunch of side characters, and honestly I did not think there would be a bunch of side characters. I gave this book 4.5 stars just because even though I loved it and it almost made me cry again on the airplane, I did not like some of the side point of view characters. Like there was like a 30-year-old guy that was just complaining the whole time, and his point of view was too much. Like I wanted more octopus. And then we have the Bargainer series by Laura Thalassa. I finally read this one. I've had this one on my TBR for the longest time, but I drew it like in my mini books jar, so I finally got around to reading the entire series. I also read the novella book too, which is like 200 pages, but I read that on my Kindle, so I don't have like the paper copy of it. This series was like a more soap opera-y version of A Court of Thorns and Roses. But in this book, for the past 7 years, Calypso has collected a string of favors from the bargainer, and she has like 300 favors that she has to repay, and 7 years after the last favor that she requested, the bargainer shows up at her doorstep and is like, hey, it's time to repay your favors. And the bargainer, he is a fae king, and Calypso is a siren, and it takes place in like the modern day human world as well as the fae world too. So I love fae folklore, so these books are right up my alley. But the reason why the bargainer comes to collect his favors from Calypso is because there's something going wrong in the fae world, where fae warriors are going missing, and then they're returned in these glass caskets, and they're not dead, but they have no like consciousness. So there's rumors that there's evil and there's a forces to be reckoned with, and he needs Calypso's help. Again, the world building was really lacking in this, like, which is fine because the drama and the romance really made up for the questionable world building. And it's annoying though, because in this book, the glimpses of the world that we have, like, there was so much potential for excellent world building and tons of explorations, and there's a lot of other interesting side characters that have potential for spin-offs, but then there's not that, which is a little bit disappointing. And there's also no maps, which is also disappointing. They're just super binge-worthy, but they are like darker. They're not dark, but they're darker than like your A Court of Thorns and Roses. So I gave the first one, Rhapsodic, 4.25 stars. I gave A Strange Hymn 4 stars. My favorite one was actually the novella book, which takes place in between the second and third book, An Emperor of Evening Stars. This was from the bargainer's perspective and his backstory, because these books are all written in first person, so you don't see the bargainer's perspective, and I was so curious about his perspective the entire time, so I loved reading the novella. And the last book, Dark Harmony, I gave this one 4.5 stars. And finally, now we have books 3 through 6 of the Dark Olympus series by Katie Roberts. These books are romances. They are theoretically interconnected standalones, and I think the first 2 books, Neon Gods and Electric Idol, you can read those 2 as standalones, but then a plot like starts in Wicked Beauty, and then you have to read all of them in order. And what's interesting about this series is they're not great, but they're addicting, like a reality TV show. So the series, it takes place in a modern day Olympus, and it's ruled by the 13 gods and goddesses, but they're not actually gods and goddesses. They're just politicians that wear the title of like Ares and Apollo and Athena, and each god and goddess is like in charge of a different like sector that the city needs. So like Demeter is agriculture, Athena is like security and stuff like that. And each book is a very loose retelling of Greek myths. So Wicked Beauty is Helen, Achilles, and Patroclus. In this book, all 3 of them are participating in a tournament to win the title of one of the Greek gods. I gave this one 4.25 stars. Radiant Sin is Cassandra and Apollo. This one was kind of boring, but there was fake dating. I gave this one 3.5 stars. The 2 of them infiltrate a house party of someone who enters Olympus with suspicious intentions. Cruel Seduction is Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Pandora, and Adonis, and there is a marriage of convenience, enemies to lovers in this one. And Midnight Ruin, I love the Barnes & Noble special edition of this one. It's so pretty. This is Charon, Eurydice, and Orpheus. Their second chance romance in this one. This one continues to deal with the person who is an outsider to Olympus as like the overarching plot. So would recommend these if you like romances and Greek mythology. Again, very loosely based on Greek mythology. And that's it. That's all the books I read in February. I feel like it was a really good reading month. I flew home to Colorado this month, and I feel like when I'm on the plane, that gives me so much time to just like read without any interruption. So I feel like that's why I read a lot. But thanks so much for watching today's video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up and or comment down below what your favorite book that you've read this year so far has been, and subscribe to my channel. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Goodreads for more bookish content and literally other content of whatever my other niches are at Susan Carolyn, and I'll see you next time. Bye.